which is, ah, yes, the anarchists and the libertarian lefties will immediately defect to the evil imperialist fascists the moment something like this happens. Well, let me put it to you this way. During the Second World War, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, due to their political policies, was responsible for the mass starvation and death of several million Indians. Bengalis, specifically. That is something that the UK denies, and British nationalists today deny, but it is something they did.
Yeah, I don't deny it.
Okay?
I do not deny. I'm very much aware that happened. And
now, exactly. But here's the point: does that mean that I will switch over and go, well, obviously, that means that that Adolf guy in Germany has a point? Fuck no. I sat on the fence and I was saying, look, Russia has some concerns. Like NATO expansionism is perhaps an issue. The intervention in Yugoslavia was a bit of a muddy area. Maybe, putting NATO tanks a day's drive from Moscow might be a bit of an escalatory position. Maybe we should sit down and talk about this. And then Putin decides to launch a full-scale invasion and conduct what can only be described as ethnic cleansing. He's kidnapped orphaned children and forced them into Russification in Russia. As an Australian who is living with the effects of what my country did to our indigenous people, like, I've had too much to drink, but I'm getting blunt. Do people comprehend what this is? I tried being the neutral pacifist. I tried being the guy who looked at both sides. By doing what he's doing, Putin has invalidated any excuse he had whatsoever. None. And the fact that we have to sit day after day listening to these people on the internet justify it. None.
There is no justification for it, but that's the thing. Have you ever met a proper neo-Nazi?
I've fought them in the streets more than once. Like, actually, I during Australia's struggle for the rights of LGBT people to get married, I got into more than one physical altercations with members of what they were calling themselves the True Blue Crew. If any of my fellow Aussies remember that group, yeah, I am well acquainted with fucking neo-Nazis.
Yeah, I may have had a similar experience with the British Nazi Party. Sorry, the British National Party.
Oh yeah, that's right.
They were still a thing. There was a bit of a fight here and there on the Royal Mile. Now, if you actually sit down and speak to a neo-Nazi, because I have, and I find their positions intriguing. I always like, how could you justify this? And the thing is, and I have kind of noticed this with the Baptists as well. They don't start by justifying Nazis. They don't start by justifying the Nazis, or Nazi Germany, or Hitler's policy, or Holocaust, or anything like that. They start by telling you how evil everybody else is in comparison. How evil the British are, how evil the Americans were, how horrible the French were and the Dutch were to their colonists, and like the imprisonment of the slaves and the campaigns of horror and the original concentration camps. That's where they start. Everybody else is evil. And once they've managed to make you realize just how evil everybody else is, suddenly Nazi Germany doesn't seem so bad. And that's how they start to get you. That's how they start to drag you down into their fucking mud pit. And I've noticed the exact same tactics. They never start with justifying Putin's policies, or the war crimes, or even the invasion of the Ukraine. They start by telling you how fucking evil America is, and how horrible NATO is, and all the shit that they've done. And they usually start with Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, the war of Kosovo and everything. And then they move on to Afghanistan and Iraq, and they'll talk about that for hours and hours and hours before they get to the war in Ukraine. Because they want you to believe that everybody else Russia's not as evil as all these other people. In fact, what they're doing is fairly normal, it's fairly common. That's how they operate. That's how they work.
Power weapons now available.
It's one of the big points because Vatniks only ever have, and this is the same thing as tankies. Their sole political position of a tanky is America bad. That is it, or Western imperialism bad. And it doesn't matter what it is. They'll justify Pol Pot. They'll justify Bashar al-Assad. They'll justify Saddam Hussein. They'll justify Gaddafi. My favorite. Go ahead. This is the best one. I'll send you a link to this later. You can put a link to it in chat if you like.
Oh, I'd love to.
My favorite one is from a Trotskyist organization, the Spartaites. And for those of you who are confused or not educated, Trotskyists are tankies that are mad they didn't get to be tankies. That's it. Trotskyites
You're not fucking wrong.
They're not mad about the purging and the Holodomor and the death camps and everything like that. They're not mad about that. They're mad about the fact that their guy wasn't the one doing it. And I used to be one. I've not shied away from the fact that I used to be a tanky. And yes, before this war started, I was repeating a lot of the lines that Russian propaganda repeats now. And there's a reason for that. Because when you're locked in that mindset of criticizing American interventionism, like Dylan was saying earlier, when you've been criticizing American interventionism and a lot of the other things that NATO has done and a lot of the other things that, you know, the UK and other countries have done over the years, and of course you're a lefty in my case, so you have a lot of personal beliefs that conflict with the mainstream narrative, you're willing to make excuses. You're willing to sit there and go, oh, you know, this is a two-sided issue, this is a problem, this is a multifaceted concern. And of course it doesn't help that during Euromaidan, quite frankly, there were a lot of reactionary elements in Ukraine. In revolutionary states there always are. The reason why Russian propaganda focuses so
I hate to interrupt you, but I'm actually releasing an interview very soon, probably definitely within the next 5 to 4 days, with a right sector fighter who was fighting since 2014, under the idea that I believe that by showing very clearly what this ultranationalist ideology is, shining a light on what the right sector is today, it can kind of get, you know, kind of wipe away a lot of the propaganda around it and give people more clear primary source about what these types of fighters, the more ideologically devoted ones, like. Because they're far right, they're ultra-nationalists, but they don't have the influence the Russians say they have. They failed miserably in 2019 to garner any political support. All the nationalist parties, Svoboda, Right Sector, they all put all their forces together, Azov's National Corps, in order to just get into the Rada, get 5%. They got 2.3, right? But that doesn't mean that the subculture doesn't exist in the military. It should still be documented. But I think, you know, light is the best disinfectant, and I'm really excited to release it.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. I'm looking forward to it too, because as a lefty and then being a historian on top of that, specializing in the Second World War, it was very, very hard initially before the war started, because you'll see images of Azov and you'll see Pravy Sektor and you'll see all those groups, and you also know the history of Stepan Bandera and the Waffen-SS movement and the collaboration of the Ukrainian nationalist movement with Nazi Germany during the Second World War, which is a tough topic. It's a very complex topic.
It is. The thing is, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to make apologies for the Azov Legion and for all the shit that they believe in and some of the stuff that they've done. I'm well aware of their policies and ideology, and I'm not going to sit here and defend it and say that, yes, these people were in the right and we need it. The thing is, you know, what is the Azov Legion? It's like pre-war, it was like, what, 1,500 people?
Just about.
Just about. Like, yeah, so these people are running around, being dumb, shouting their dumb opinions, making videos themselves, stamping their chests and going, wow, whatever. Russia's actively committing genocide.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I've put this thought experiment in front of people before, but like, if Alaska was being invaded right now by like the Chinese or the Russians, pick your enemy, whatever, and like they were calling for people to mobilize and head to Alaska to help defend Anchorage or whatever, and you were on a bus and you looked around you and there were members of QAnon there with you, holding guns, ready to defend freedom, ready to defend the American way of life, the American flag, would you tell them to get off the bus and go back home? Or would you send them to the front line?
That, unironically, I've described most of it, like most of the ideologically devoted right sector fighters, or the ones that, you know, maybe even aren't that ideological but hold some favoritism towards Ukrainian ultranationalism, because there are members who join because either they can't, well, this used to be the case before they were integrated. They joined because they had lower standards, they weren't as stringent, so let's say you got an injury in combat, you might go to the right sector because the official Ukrainian military won't take anymore. But for the ones that are ideologically devoted, they remind me most of like the far right, like American militia types. You know, like the 3%ers. They remind me somewhat like that. That's what they remind me of. But also, we all know if America was invaded, I don't think anyone would be complaining if they started like if they threw themselves front lines against whatever invading force had stepped on American soil.
Yeah, exactly.
It's one of those interesting
Gotta get my
things.
charger. Be right back.
It's one of those interesting things when you discuss it, because when I talk about my position before the war and then my position after it started, a lot of people were caught by surprise at how quickly I threw my support behind Ukraine. They thought, well, you know, how can you go from being neutral, even slightly pro-Russia, to completely pro-NATO or pro-Ukraine, right? And the answer was very simple. There is a difference between negotiating, like, you know, if Putin had thrown in peacekeepers into the Donbass and then there was an international crisis summit in the UN and this war didn't happen, you know, we would all be a fucking footnote.
Yeah.
Frankly.
I've got an even easier answer. And it's the same answer that I give all the time, anytime I meet one of these Vatniks in the wild. Like, anytime they start their spiel about what Ukraine did, and about the Azov Legion, and about the Nazis, and the whatever, and how evil NATO is, NATO expansion, whatever, I just repeat the same line. Russia's actively committing genocide.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if Britain has a fucking monarchy. It doesn't matter if America did the Trail of Tears and slavery, and it doesn't matter if the Dutch East India Company committed absolute mass genocide. It doesn't matter if Britain slaughtered millions, potentially absolute millions of Indians. It doesn't matter if NATO has gradually expanded and threatened Russia. Russia is actively committing genocide. That is the one line. That is what we are trying to prevent. We're not trying to blow up fucking Russia because we're racists. We're not trying to increase the fucking power of NATO over yet another small Eastern European country. No, we're trying to prevent a genocide. Russia is actively committing genocide. Children have gone missing. About something ridiculous, like 30,000 people are still missing. I've seen the bodies. I've seen the pictures. I've seen. We have more evidence of this genocide than we do about the fucking Holocaust.
We've still got the camps on it.
We still have the camps.
Yep. But of course, the same old story, the same old refrain. Because as someone who's recovered from it, I can tell you, the power of propaganda when you're in it is exceedingly overpowering. It's ridiculously overpowering. Like, when you're part of the movement, when you grow up in a world surrounded by what amounts to, for lack of a better term, Western chest thumping, right? You know, you've got Ollie North on Fox News rolling with the Abrams over the border of Iraq, you know, gung-ho, let's go, like, you know, bombing villages and crap like that. You know, when you grow up in that environment, you develop an extremely nihilistic view of our own countries. and you sort of want to sort of find it's the old story, the grass is always greener. When you sort of find yourself being bombarded with that all your life,
Yeah.
you try everything, and it's only when you're confronted with the reality of that ideology,
Enemy flag carrier.
the old song goes, whose side are you on? So, George Orwell, Kraut, our friend, our mutual friend, mentioned this in his video regarding American imperialism over the years. When you have a position of neutrality or a position of pacifism
Out of
in the
harm's way.
face of imperialist aggression, that position is inherently pro-aggressor, or in this case, pro-fascist.
Yes.
Pro-fascist oligarch. You say, like, you gotta understand, the big reason why Putin's pushing the Azov angle and the denazification angle so strongly, as I mentioned in my propaganda video, is because to lefties like me, tankies especially, but to all lefties generally, we are inherently based in anti-fascism. We hate fascists. And by leveraging the existence of Pravi Sektor and Azov, he can get an endless army of useful idiots. Including me, as I said, including me initially. When this was starting to happen, I pointed out that the West had a very softball reaction to Azov and Pravi Sektor. And because of my history background, I of course knew about the Waffen-SS Galicia and the Ukrainian nationalist movement's collaboration with the Holocaust. So, you know, to a young lefty who knows about, you know, those particular issues,
Enemy carrier.
I was very susceptible to the Kremlin's narrative. And so I bought it. Of course. Because America bad, NATO evil, and Azov Nazi bad. So, of course, I can ignore all the bigger issues. And I can just go along with the Kremlin's narrative. And if it will stop America from doing America things, then all well and better.
Yeah. Because America is the aggressor here. America's the
Of course.
nation.
Of course, America bad.
What gets me is like since day one of this war back in 2014, there have been neo-Nazis fighting on the Russian war, specifically
Yeah, 100%.
organized under neo-Nazi formations, and that's the distinction some people will try to make. Well, the difference is Azov is a military unit, and specifically with the symbolic. No, Rusisch has existed since basically the start of this war, a neo-Nazi Russian militia. I've always expressed to people that this war has nothing to do with Nazism. The Nazism angle has always been propaganda. It has always been a way to rally the people. Slavs, for good reason, hate the Nazis because the Nazis tried to kill all of the Slavs. The Nazis hated Ukrainians, the Nazis hated Russians. And so it's really easy to convince somebody to go fight Nazis. So if you can make them think they're fighting Nazis, then you've got a propaganda W. That's the purpose of Nazis being brought up, even though they make up such a small portion of the Ukrainian military overall, and even of the ultranationalists in question. Like, a lot of them are far right, but they're not even what you would describe, if we're being honest, like as Nazis. They're like weird, like militia types, but it has to be Nazis, and they'll describe them specifically as Nazis, even if there isn't any anti-Semitism with them, because the question is about anti-Russianness, and that's what they're trying to get across. It isn't really about like the ideology of fascism or Adolf Hitler's Nazism. It's about anti-Russianness, and that's how they've always described Nazism. And that's why there's no contradiction to them that a Nazi state is being led by a Jewish leader whose country instituted protections for LGBTQ plus workers in 2015. I don't know of many Nazi states that instituted protections for LGBTQ plus employees.
Yeah, and that's what's really distressing me, because I bought into that line because, quite frankly, as, you know, a lefty who specializes in World War II, the pathological hatred of Nazis runs very deep. And so the idea that I could even be on the same side